Hey everyone, this is lecture 10.1, Religion. In this lecture, we are going to be defining religion. We're going to talk about some theories of religion, and then we're going to talk about what exactly a cult is. So, first let's define religion. Religion is very hard to define. A dictionary definition of religion is that it is a personal set or institutionalized system of religious attitudes, beliefs, and practices. It could also be defined in the dictionary as the service and worship of God or the supernatural, or a commitment or devotion to religious faith or observance. Now, those are all pretty darn vague, and additionally, as we'll go through in the following slides, none of those three definitions actually apply to all world religions. A more academic definition of religion is that religion has unique content or substance relating to the sacred that separates it from other forms of knowledge and belief. So that is a much vaguer definition, but it's something that all academics can use for just the purpose of generally agreeing upon things and studying across fields. Now let's look at a sociological definition of religion. In sociology, we define religion as a system of common beliefs and rituals centered on quote-unquote sacred things that unite believers and provide a sense of meaning and purpose. So, we can look at this in terms of what religion does, or what functionalists would call its functions. Religion serves to create and reinforce social cohesion. It provides a sense of meaning and purpose to the people who are parts of those religions. It ritualizes and routinizes beliefs, both religious and cultural. So, to restate that last bit, religion takes our beliefs that we have, that many people hold, and it basically makes it official for the purpose of the religion and for the purpose of the culture. Now, one defining feature of religions is a belief in God, gods, or no gods at all. There are religions that are monotheistic, polytheistic, or what's sometimes called non-theistic. We'll talk about that in the following slides. Theism first, base definition there, belief in one or more supernatural deities. So, theism applies to both monotheism and polytheism. Polytheism is the belief in multiple gods. This includes religions like Hinduism, neo-paganism, and many global indigenous religions that are, by definition of indigenous, native to the people that live in that place. Monotheism, then, is the belief in a single, all-knowing, all-powerful God. So this is the concept of religion and religiosity most common in the United States and other Western nations. This includes Christianity, Islam, Jainism, Judaism, and Sikhism. Again, we're most familiar with Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Jainism and Sikhism we'll address a little bit in the next lecture. Now, there are religions that do not believe in gods, which again, from our society's perspective, can be a little tough to wrap your head around. So this is the belief in the existence of, non-theism then, is the belief in the existence of divine spiritual forces rather than a god, gods, or spiritual individuals like that. An example of a non-theistic religion is Taoism. Taoism is believes that there is a force that flows through the universe. Sometimes that force is called Qi. Sometimes that force is called the Tao. And the Tao ebbs and flows through all things. And the purpose of why someone would practice Taoism then, it would be to align their life in a way to go better with, along with what's called the current of that energy. And here we come across what I'm going to be doing a lot while we're talking about religion, sometimes snapping into what the person of that belief structure would believe, right? I just talked about Tao in that way. In doing that, I'm not intending to like convert you to that belief structure. It's just easiest to talk about how the believer would see that perspective when we do that. Atheism, then, is the belief in the non-existent existence of God, gods, or the divine. Now, this is difficult because it is debatable if atheism is a philosophy or if it is a religion itself. Atheism is most commonly associated with the humanist philosophy. Humanism, the belief there being that us humans are capable of amazing and great things, and we can do things on our own as a species, and that the great things in the world are here because humans have done them and put them here. And then you could see how that could kind of fold into a non-belief in the divine. Additionally, then, some proponents that advocate that atheism is a religion, that is largely kind of a political strategy, if you will, thus saying, well, if you want to put this this religious statue up in this area, but I do not believe in that religion, and then politically, if I can call myself as an atheist someone of a religion, then you are violating my religious rights as well, right? So it's very complex as to whether one would define atheism as a religion or not, and there certainly are even arguments among atheists as to whether it is a religion or not. Now we're going to look a little deeper into how sociologists study religion now that we have those base definitions. So, what exactly do sociologists study when they study religion? Well, as social scientists, we are in the business of studying human attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs. We do not study in sociology which religion is quote-unquote right or the reality of metaphysics. So, as scientists, we study what can be observed, right? And by definition, the metaphysical, what most people are engaging in when they do religion, pertains to the abstract concepts that cannot be measured or observed through material reality. So if we are strictly employing the scientific method, as we have discussed in previous lectures, then you cannot apply the scientific method by definition to the metaphysical, because the metaphysical cannot be observed in that way, right? So all of this is to say that as social scientists, it simply is not our business to figure out if God exists or if God doesn't exist. As social scientists, we are studying humans' attitudes and beliefs as to whether those things exist, and those are two very different things. So, we look at in sociology then religious beliefs, religious rituals, and how that pertains to what we'll talk about in a moment called religious experience. Religious beliefs are statements to which members of a particular religion adhere to or perceive as being true. So I can ask you, what do you believe religiously, right? I can ask you those things. I can document that. I can compare 100 Americans. I can pick out the Christians. I can pick out the Jews and compare what those people believe compared to each other, thus doing some social science. That is somewhat dependent on whether people actually are truthful to me in what they say they believe, which is a problem almost any social scientific study comes up against. So that belief problem then is not found when we are studying religious rituals, though. Religious rituals are the practices required or expected of members of a given faith. So rituals are the things that we do physically as part of being in a religion. And religion often serves to evoke religious experience. Talk about that on the next slide. So the communion ritual that most of us, because Christianity is very predominant in American society, we are somewhat usually familiar with the communion ritual of consuming some kind of bread with some kind of juice or wine to signify the moment of Jesus interacting with his disciples at the Last Supper, right? That is a ritualistic element of Christianity. Similarly then, the bar or bat mitzvah rituals in Judaism, those also are religious rituals in which young people move into being full adulthood at the age of 13. That is a religious ritual, and specifically that is a rite of passage religious ritual passing into adulthood. And then the Hajj within Islam is a complex series of rituals in which the adherent goes to the holy city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia and performs a week-long series of religious rituals. Religious experience, then, are the feelings or perceptions of being in direct contact with ultimate reality or of being overcome with religious emotion. Different religions have different words for accounting for this religious experience, which makes this a difficult element to compare across religions, but it's basically what you feel when you are feeling religious emotions. Christians could call this experiencing God's love or having a personal relationship with Jesus. A Buddhist could call this a glimpse of nirvana, right? A neo-pagan or someone of an indigenous religious belief could call this communing with the ancestors. Now, each of these groups of people is perceiving having a different experience, but they are having that experience in relation to that religion. That's what that is. Now we're going to work through a little bit of, oh, sorry, I got mixed up. Finally, fundamentalism is something that we find in all global religions. Fundamentalism is the rigid adherence to religious belief and the strict following of religious ritual. Nearly every religion has fundamentalists, people that may take the teachings incredibly strictly, may not necessarily, but typically they take religious scriptures then as being highly literal, right, with very little variation and potential for different perspectives as being acceptable. That's what fundamentalism is. In the United States, we are possibly most familiar with Christian fundamentalism because we have a high percentage of Christians. Globally, though, in the state of Myanmar, there are Buddhist fundamentalists there. In many parts of the Middle East, there are Muslim fundamentalists. There are Jewish fundamentalists. There's fundamentalists of every global religion. Now, fundamentalists then are not inherently extremists or terrorists, right? Fundamentalists have beliefs, but that does not mean that they will become violent people or that they will become dangerous people. Fundamentalism is about what you believe. Terrorism or that type of extremism it's a different thing entirely, really. So now let's talk about some of the sociological theories surrounding religion, namely looking at our three core sociological perspectives. Functionalism then. observes that because the manifest function of religious practices are often metaphysical, so the worship of a deity, etc., sociologists tend to focus on the latent functions when we study religion. Thus, Durkheim observed that religion serves to strengthen community solidarity and give answers to difficult questions. One of the very first things that Durkheim studied, remember as being really the first modern sociologist, is the role of religion itself. Durkheim, additionally, his work suggests that one of the religion's key functions in society is to create and reinforce collective bond, that thing he called social solidarity. Because if someone has the same faith as you know a whole lot about them all at once, right? You know maybe how they think kids should be raised. You might know something about their diet. You might know something about what they do in a given week. And that gives you a whole bunch of information all at once. And instantly knowing that information about an individual creates a quick collective bond. Durkheim was also interested in the relationship between what he called the sacred versus the profane. Now, it should be pointed out that these terms are different than what we commonly use these terms as. This is a point where it's important to use the sociological definition, especially for our exams. The sacred, in this regard, is something that is special, specifically special to the religion. It is something that is not ordinary. The profane, then, is not something that is bad, but something that is ordinary, everyday stuff. So, doubling back, talking about that Christian religion, that Christian religious rite of communion, right? If you go to the liquor store or the wine shop or whatever, and you buy a bottle of wine, that is profane wine. That is ordinary wine, everyday wine that you could have. But if wine is used as part of the communion ritual, that, because of the way it is presented and the way that the religious ritual goes, that then becomes sacred wine. And not only spiritually sacred, which, again, we don't study in sociology, but socially sacred, of great social importance to the religious adherent. That's what we're talking about there. It's special. It's not ordinary. That's the difference. Now, when we talk about classical Marxian social theory, there are some problematic stances that have traditionally been made when studying religion objectively, and a lot of that has to do with the social theory surrounding the era in which Marx and his writing partner Engels came up in. And as part of that kind of anti-religious era, they contended that if people are willing to suffer in this life in exchange for non-tangible rewards, it's easier to exploit them. This statement is often used in the misquote of Engels's work that religion is the opiate of the masses. That's not the direct quote. That's not exactly what he's saying, but that is the overall sentiment, that of this era, scientists often saw religion as being something that tricks people, right? And if I can trick you into behaving so that you will give me your money, then you're easier for me to take advantage of you. That is kind of the classical Marxian view on religion, and to a certain degree, that has been true in certain social situation, particularly the aristocratic era of Europe that was the precursor to this kind of anti-religious era when Marx and Engels were doing their work. So, yes, you can use religion to take advantage of people, sure. But in the mid-20th century, conflict theorists started to acknowledge that religion has been used by oppressed people to overthrow authority as well. So not only can religion be used to oppress people, religion can also be used to liberate people. Now, this is often called liberation theology. Now, there's a difference between how you punctuate liberation theology. When you capitalize it, capital L, capital T, liberation theology, that's speaking about a specific type of Catholicism that is rooted in Latin America and is tied to certain peasant and workers' rebellions of the late 1800s and mid 1900s. Really a very fascinating time in global history in which these renegade priests, these renegade Catholic priests, specifically they were Jesuit priests, were helping the common people, the peasants, rise up against their oppressive overlords. Now, if that's something that's interesting to you, I suggest reading the book War of the End of the World by Mario Vargas Llosa. It was written in the 1970s. It's almost action-packed. It's a really very interesting look at that it's a fascinating phenomena, is what I have to end saying there. So this image of Jesus with a gun slung over his shoulder, this is it really encapsulates a lot of the concept of the liberation theologian. Like, hey, listen, my people are oppressed and we need to rise up kind of idea. And this idea wasn't really examined in the first era of conflict theory. Additionally, then, when we spell liberation theology with a lowercase l and a lowercase t, this can be used to describe any leader using religion in order to overthrow oppressive power structures. So examples of that lowercase l, lowercase t liberation theologians would be people like Martin Luther King Jr., who was a Southern Baptist pastor. Malcolm X also was a Muslim liberation theologian in New York City that came to great prominence in the United States during the 1960s. And then also Mahatma Gandhi, who used, as part of his revolution in India in the 1940s, he used his Hindu spirituality to prop up his revolution. Additionally, then, while Marx contended that religion serves the interest of the ruling class, Weber then observed a different mechanic. And Weber then observed this thing he called the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. In doing that, he observed that Protestant beliefs and behaviors gave rise to modern capitalism. And this is very much not really talking about Christianity as it exists today, but Christianity as it existed in the late 1800s. Specifically, a very specific type of Protestant, what's called Calvinist religious belief. So these people, this very specific set of people that were also very rich, believed in predestination and its indicators. So they believed that if you were going to be going to heaven, that was decided before you're born, right? That's the idea of predestination from that old-fashioned version of that. If you're at all familiar with the modern teachings of the Presbyterian Church, they still do teach about predestination, but it's an almost entirely different concept. But the idea of that era was that if you're going to heaven, that's already been decided, and you want to try to figure out if you're going to heaven. And if you're going to heaven, then the idea of that era was, then you would make a lot of money. You would be successful in your job. That would indicate if you would be going to heaven. So that's part one. So if you're super rich, that's a pretty good indicator to you. Part two then was abstention from all physical pleasure. So people that believed in this certain ideology also believed they shouldn't have fun with their money, they shouldn't enjoy their money. Not only would they abstain from sex largely, they would abstain from eating delicious food, they would abstain from dancing, they would abstain from having too much fun. That basically was the idea there. And then they also had this ideological commitment to hard work and enterprise, right? So if you think about what almost a ideal leader of business, especially during this era, you see how that combination of beliefs of a leader could prop up capitalism, could prop up businesses, because these people are making colossal amounts of money, but they're not spending it and they're not having fun with it. So thus they are only reinvesting it into the business, right? And all of those came together to prop up capitalism in this time when it was relatively weak in the late 1800s. Socialist ideas were very popular during this era. Hypothetically, had this Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism not been a factor, there's a very real possibility that society could have gone a different way about 150 years ago. Symbolic interactionists then focus on how religious symbols interact in relation to religion and its followers in society. What we're saying here is that religion is full of very rich symbols that help people interact with each other and communicate very complex ideas. All of these religious symbols on this slide are very, very sacred to the people that believe in those given religions. But if you are not as familiar with those religious symbols, it might, if you know that the moon with a star in it is a symbol of Islam, you may know that, but that's about as much as you could take from it. The wheel down in the lower right-hand corner there, that is a symbol of Buddhism, so you may know that, or you might not. If not, it just looks like a wheel. If you're vaguely familiar with Buddhism, you know that's a symbol of Buddhism, but if you're not very familiar with Buddhism, you might not know that that's a symbol and indicator of what they call the Eightfold Path. And then we have what very much looks like a swastika on there too. And if you're not super familiar with very traditionalist Hindu and certain Buddhist religious beliefs, you might not recognize that version of the swastika as being thousands of years old and not generally associated with the Nazi Party. Then that could be an entirely different thing. A lot of concepts and a lot of ideas are conveyed by a simple religious symbol. An example of this is what's called the chick tracts. In all likelihood, they're becoming less common. You may have never seen these. Chick tracts are a pretty common evangelism tool in the United States, used by people trying to spread their Christian religion. These chick tracts are very complex sets of symbols. Most of them are religious, some of them aren't religious. And we see here the John 3:16, so a specific piece of religious scripture, complex symbol. We see an individual crucified on a cross. Again, we know that due to association with Christianity, that's intended to indicate Jesus, right? But again, outside of those sets of knowledges, we wouldn't know that. And then in this more right-hand slide, we see what our complex cultural concepts tell us is the devil threatening somebody after they have died and gone to hell, right? Complex series of ideas, all of which require a certain cultural knowledge and a certain religious knowledge to be able to pick apart, even if you're not actually parts of those religions. In the United States, because Christianity is very, very common, most of us are somewhat familiar with these symbols despite your actual religion. Now, this link I have here is a research presentation I did on the Chick tracts itself. If you want to learn more about that and kind of my findings that I found in my study of that, feel free, but that's just kind of a bonus thing I put there. So now let's talk about cults for a moment. And I think this is important to talk about religion, because sometimes when we talk about religion, people just kind of say the word cult. They may not necessarily know what that entails. And also, as people who are in college, you are somewhat statistically more likely to get involved in a dangerous cult, because whenever we go into transition moments in our lives, we start to question things. So, all religions have to start from somewhere. So, on that premise, most religions start off as cults at some point. The question there being, are all cults bad? Because being a cult or being a mainstream religion is almost entirely based on the size of the religious organization and the age of the religious organization. Almost all religions start as cults eventually. And whether or not cults are bad is something that sociologists, especially since the 1970s, have explained rather extensively. Here we have an image of an organization that was called the Process Church. It is not a cult that exists anymore. And in terms of are cults bad? I would argue that yes, the Process Church was quite bad. I think the book on the Process Church is called Love, Fear, Sex, Death. It's a really amazingly good book. It's also a fun read if you're interested in that. Love, Fear, Sex, Death. The simple answer, though, is that no, not all small religious groups, i.e. cults, they're not bad inherently, right? They're not inherently dangerous. And it should be pointed out that being strange does not necessarily make a new religion a cult, right? Just because people have weird beliefs doesn't mean that they're inherently dangerous. And as a matter of fact, many cults, especially cults in the United States, are based in Christianity. We often don't think of cults as being Christian, but actually many cults in the United States are Christian. But also, not all cults are religious. The organization that was known as NXIVM. NXIVM was, you could call it a self-help organization or a leadership organization. They didn't really have any religiosity involved in the entity itself, but they acted in some very dangerous cult-like ways. We'll talk about that on our next slide. Those organizations that can be classified as cults, there are qualities that make them dangerous, and that's the thing. So just because your brother, just because your friend gets involved in a weird religious group does not necessarily make that a cult. Look out for these three qualities. And these are just some qualities, but look out for these three. Does the organization demand large amounts of money for either membership to the organization or to advance in the organization? Now, most religions want some kind of offering for you to contribute to the organization. That's okay. We're talking about thousands of dollars just to be a member of the group. That is a dangerous indicator. If it is not acceptable for you to question the authority or leadership of those in charge of the group, if it's not okay to question the pastor or the religious person or whatever, that's a kind of a warning sign. And then if the religion demands that you cut off contact with your friends or your family members when they are not a part of the cult, or part of the religion, that also is it's a red flag. Now, there are many checklists like this. This is just a very simplified one. And actually, there is a wide scope of a little bit not too great to intensely dangerous in terms of cults there too. And if you do some Google searches, you can find some really good checklists really quick to see, is this group a cult? Start with these three and then maybe go from there. And this one's just pretty simple. So I just want to give you that information because, you know, as college students, you are at kind of a risk of, unfortunately, becoming a member of a cult. That is it for this lecture then. If you have any questions, just let me know.